The second season of this anime begins by introducing an online game called Gun Gale Online or GGO, where players can use various weapons to defeat their enemies. This game is known as a game that is quite popular among Japanese people, and even many top players from the GGO game have received attention from various media. Two of the top players in the GGO game named Zexseed and Yamikaze even received an interview invitation from one of the television media in the GGO game. Many GGO players were enthusiastic and watched the interview through the television broadcast in the game. In the interview, Zexseed said that he would take part in a competition in the GGO game called Bullet of Bullets or BOB and challenge other players to participate in the competition. At the same time, several players seemed to be watching the broadcast at a cafe in the GGO game world. In the crowd, a mysterious black-hooded player began to approach the TV screen in the cafe and pointed a gun at Zexseed while saying he would kill him. Hearing this, the players in the cafe immediately laughed out loud at the silliness of the mysterious player because there was no way a player could kill another player that way. But all the laughter in the cafe began to fade when the man fired shots and Zexseed suddenly disconnected from the game. And after direct investigation, it was confirmed that Zexseed had died in real life from a heart attack. The mysterious player then said that the weapon he currently has is a weapon capable of killing all players in the real world. The mysterious player then introduced himself with the nickname Death Gun before finally, the player avatar disappeared and was cut off from the game. A few days after the murder incident by Death Gun, a young man named Kikuoka, who works at an online game development company, is assigned to investigate the case. Kikuoka, who knew Kirito, decided to ask him for help investigating this. Moreover, Kirito is one of the top online game players and has been in the game world for a long time, so he understands the ins and outs of online gaming far more than Kikuoka. Initially, Kirito refused the job because he realized that the case was quite dangerous, but when he discovered that the fees offered were very high, he was finally willing to help Kikuoka. In the initial hypothesis, Kirito knew that killing a player in the game was impossible because the atmosphere device used to log in into the GGO game was designed not to harm the players. Atmosphere is even much safer than previous tools such as Nervagear, which can damage nerves in the brain. To investigate this further, Kirito decided to register in the GGO game and leave the Alfheim online game that he had always played before. Compared to registering for the GGO game with a new account, Kirito prefers to transfer his account in the ALO game to the GGO game so that all the experience, skills, and all the points he has earned in the previous game can be used to the fullest in the GGO game. Not only that, but he also decided to log in through an advanced technology developed at the hospital so that his real body could always be monitored and protected. One day before Kirito logged into the GGO game, there was a female player named Shinon, who was known as the best sniper in the GGO game. Shinon is the only best female top player in the GGO game because there are rarely women who play GGO games, which incidentally are FPS games. Shinon's main reason for playing the GGO game was to treat her trauma from the bad events she had experienced in the past. This is because several years ago, when she was still an elementary school student, she accidentally killed a robber who intended to rob the post office. At the time of the robbery incident, Shinon actually only intended to snatch weapons from the robbers who almost killed one of the female employees at the post office. But because of panic and fear, Shinon accidentally shot the robber until the robber died. Since that incident, she was deeply traumatized because she had killed someone at a very young age. Shinon is often frightened when she sees a toy gun and is often called a murderer by her friends at school. And the worst thing is that 3 of her classmates take advantage of her trauma condition to extort some money from her. Fortunately, one male friend of Shinon's named Shinkawa always helps her and accompanies her in these difficult times. Due to this situation, Shinon decided to distract herself by playing GGO until she finally became one of the top players in the game. The next day, Shinon logged into the GGO game again to participate in the BOB competition, in which only the top players could participate. At the same time, Kirito also logged in from the hospital, determined to become one of the top players in the GGO game. When entering the game world, Kirito was surprised because his avatar turned into an avatar that resembled a girl to make other players approach and tease her. After successfully escaping from a perverted male player, he intends to register in the BOB competition so that he can quickly become a top player. But because he still doesn't have a weapon, Kirito looks confused about finding a place that usually sells weapons. Fortunately, Shinon, who saw Kirito at that time and thought he was a female player, immediately approached Kirito and helped him. Shinon was happy to find another female player because so far she had never found a female player in the game. When Shinon escorted Kirito to the weapons shop, she started a conversation by asking Kirito the reason for playing the game. Kirito then lied by saying that he logged into the game because he was interested in the BOB competition. Hearing Kirito's answer, Shinon immediately warned him that only players with a fairly high level could enter the BOB competition. Kirito then explained that the account he was using was an account converted from another game, so that should be enough criteria to get him accepted into the competition. When he wanted to buy a weapon, Kirito just realized that the money he had from the ALO game could not be converted in the game, so he had to collect money from a mini-game in the game. He then easily won the game thanks to his bullet prediction skill from the previous game and the level of power of his avatar. As a result, Kirito could earn a lot of money in a very short time, which impressed Shinon and the other players because it was rare for a new player to win the mini-game so far. After earning a lot of money, Kirito began to choose the weapon he would use for the BOB competition later. Not only she was surprised of Kirito's abilities, but Shinon was also surprised by his preference for laser swords over firearms, even though the game is an FPS game that uses more long-range weapons than melee weapons such as the laser sword. After getting the weapon, Kirito started registering in the BOB competition. At that time, he was suspicious because there was a column asking for the player's real name and address in the registration form. But luckily, that column was just an optional column, so he could choose to leave it blank. After registering, Shinon then asked Kirito to change costumes together in a dressing room. At that moment, Kirito was nervous about Shinon's half-naked appearance and decided to admit that he was actually a male player. Shinon, who was shocked and angry to hear that, immediately slapped and avoided Kirito. Kirito could only feel guilty and repeatedly apologized to Shinon so that she would forgive him. Shortly after Shinon and Kirito made up, Shinon's friend Shinkawa came to the place to support her, who was about to compete. When the match started, Kirito, who only used a gun and a laser sword, managed to win the match by a landslide. He could even block all the bullets from the opponent so that none of the opponent's attacks can hit him. While Kirito was in the lobby waiting for the next battle, Death Gun suddenly appeared behind him. Death Gun admits that he is a former victim of the SAO game like Kirito and knows all of Kirito's abilities in the SAO game. Not only that, but Kirito then began to realize that Death Gun was a member of a guild called Laughing Coffin, where the guild had the heart to kill SAO players for no apparent reason. Knowing this, Kirito looked scared because he remembered that all the guilds in the SAO game agreed to kill Laughing Coffin's guild members because the guild had killed other players arbitrarily. Kirito could clearly remember when he killed 2 SAO players from the Laughing Coffin guild, and that incident left a deep trauma for him. This was because, in the SAO game, any player could kill another player in the real world, which meant Kirito had killed another person in the massacre. Not long after that, Death Gun left Kirito, who was still sitting limp because he was feeling the trauma he had experienced in the past. Just when Shinon wanted to ask Kirito about what was bothering him, Kirito suddenly shifted to the battlefield because his battle had already started. Even though Kirito was in a down condition and only relied on the sword as his main weapon, he was still able to win the battle until he made it to the final qualifying round. In the final match, Kirito unexpectedly had to face Shinon, one of the best snipers in the game. At first, Kirito didn't seem serious when fighting Shinon, so she immediately scolded him. Kirito, who had woken up from his daydream, immediately apologized and asked Shinon to do a rematch. In this match, Kirito really took Shinon seriously, and finally, he became the first player to beat Shinon in the competition. The next day, when Shinkawa and Shinon were playing on the swings in the playground, Shinon let out an annoyed sigh because Kirito had managed to beat her in yesterday's match. Shinon, who felt angry, even unconsciously made a gun gesture with her hand, even though she had always been afraid of that gesture. Shinkawa, who saw this, was very worried and immediately hugged Shinon tightly while expressing his feelings to her. Shinon seemed surprised by Shinkawa's sudden confession of love, so she immediately let go of his embrace and said that she would give an answer after the BOB tournament ended. On the other hand, Kirito tried to tell the beautiful nurse who had been caring for him while in the hospital about his problem. He revealed that he had killed someone when he was trapped in a game called Sword Art Online, and until now, he is still haunted by feelings of guilt over the incident. Seeing Kirito, who was injured by the trauma, the nurse lent him a shoulder so that he could lean on and cry to express all his sadness. After telling this, Kirito felt more relieved and was ready to resume his investigation to find Death Gun. Kirito then re-entered the GGO game to participate in the Battle Royale version of the BOB tournament so that he could come out as a winner and become a top player. When the tournament started, Kirito secretly followed 2 male players named Pale Rider and Dine because he suspected one of them to be Death Gun. When Kirito stalked the 2 of them, he accidentally met Shinon, so he immediately asked her for help to cooperate with him by not launching attacks until the fight between Dine and Pale Rider ended. Unfortunately, Kirito's suspicions turned out to be wrong because the 2 of them did not have the weapons normally used by Death Gun. However, shortly after Pale Rider defeated Dine, he suddenly fell down due to a light stun that made him unable to move for several minutes. Kirito and Shinon then looked surprised because they didn't detect the radar of any other players in the area apart from the 4 of them. And it turned out that the person who had paralyzed Pale Rider was Death Gun, who then approached Pale Rider and shot him with a gun until he actually died in the real world. Although Kirito has not been able to detect the real identity of Death Gun, he realizes that before Death Gun executes his victim, Death Gun always looks at the watch on his wrist. Before Death Gun left, Kirito immediately ordered Shinon to shoot Death Gun, but unfortunately, Death Gun had already fled using a smoke bomb. After Shinon found out that Death Gun could actually kill other players in the real world, Shinon offered to help Kirito investigate the case. Since then, Shinon and Kirito's journey to find Death Gun and reveal the true identity of Death Gun begins. After that, Kirito and Shinon decided to go to a nearby town because Death Gun was most likely hiding there. Shortly after circling the city, Kirito saw someone hiding behind a wall, so he immediately rushed over to that person and ordered Shinon to stay behind. But unexpectedly, Death Gun suddenly appeared from behind and shot Shinon with a light stun while the person behind the wall was just an ordinary player. When Death Gun almost shot Shinon, she immediately recognized the gun used by Death Gun, which was the same weapon she had used in the robbery incident at the post office. Fortunately, Kirito arrived on time and immediately carried Shinon from that place so that he could save Shinon. But an odd thing started to happen. Instead of shooting Kirito with a death gun, he actually intended to shoot Kirito with a rifle, which would only kill Kirito in the game. Fortunately, Kirito and Shinon managed to survive the gunfire, so they had a chance to escape on a motorbike. When Shinon and Kirito were hiding in a cave in the middle of the desert, a frightened Shinon started crying and told Kirito about her trauma. After learning that Shinon had killed someone at a very young age, Kirito, who understood the trauma Shinon was feeling, began to try to calm her down. Kirito explained that he had also experienced the same incident, so he could understand the pain that Shinon had been feeling all this time. As the situation calmed down, Kirito began to think hard about solving the riddle about Death Gun's true identity. He recalled that Death Gun was a player killer in the SAO game who the game's top player had slaughtered. In the GGO game, Death Gun is also targeting the top player, where he always uses time calculations before executing his victims, and all of those victims die for the same reason, namely having a heart attack. All players who became victims of the Death Gun had another thing in common, namely that they were people who lived alone in an apartment. Kirito then started to analyze why Death Gun didn't kill him using the Death Gun and was just trying to eliminate him from the game using a rifle. After gathering all that information, Kirito concluded that there might be more than one Death Gun, namely the Death Gun that controls the avatars in the game and the Death Gun that executes the victims in the real world. Kirito believed that Death Gun had traced the player's real name and address information from the registration data in the BOB competition. Then another Death Gun in the real world infiltrated the victim's house to execute them with a chemical injection that could cause a heart attack. Kirito also began to realize that Death Gun didn't kill him using the Death Gun because Death Gun didn't know the position of his real body in the real world. After that, Kirito also realized that Death Gun was targeting Shinon because another Death Gun in the real world was already in her room who turned out to be living alone in her apartment. Hearing this, Shinon panicked even more because her life was in danger right now. However, Kirito managed to calm Shinon and convince her that if they could kill Death Gun in the game world, she should be safe in the real world. Kirito then asked Shinon to be his backup in the back while facing Death Gun because Death Gun would not be able to kill him. When meeting Death Gun, Kirito begins to explain that he already knows all the tricks used by Death Gun to kill his victims. Death Gun then seemed impressed with Kirito, who managed to know his secret very accurately and immediately attacked him without warning. The battle between Kirito and Death Gun finally started and was fierce because they were both top players with qualified abilities. But as expected, Kirito won the battle and defeated Death Gun in the game world. Seeing Kirito's victory, Shinon was relieved and happy that she had survived death. Before logging out of the game, Shinon, who felt grateful to Kirito, immediately told him her real address. Kirito did the same thing by telling Shinon his real identity and address. He promised that he would visit Shinon's house as soon as possible to ensure that she was completely safe from Death Gun's threat. It turns out that the address of the apartment that Shinon lives in is also not far from the address of the hospital where Kirito is currently located. Then Shinon and Kirito decided to blow themselves up using a bomb so that their avatars died simultaneously, and they both could win the BOB tournament. After logging out of the GGO game, Shinon started checking the cupboard and every room in her room to make sure that Death Gun was gone. After confirming that her apartment was safe, she suddenly heard a knock on the door from outside and started to worry if it was Death Gun. But apparently, the person who knocked on the door was Shinkawa, who wanted to collect Shinon's answer to his love confession the other day as she had promised earlier. Shinon immediately apologized to Shinkawa because she still couldn't accept him as her boyfriend. Hearing the refusal, Shinkawa felt very angry and immediately hugged Shinon forcefully while threatening her that he would inject chemical drugs that could make her have a heart attack. It was finally revealed that it turned out that Shinkawa was the executioner Death Gun. The reason why the Death Gun in the game had a weapon similar to the gun Shinon used to kill robbers was because Shinkawa really idolized Shinon. Shinkawa was amazed by Shinon, who was able to kill other people at such a young age. Shinon could only surrender when Shinkawa started trying to violate her because she was afraid that if she rebelled, Shinkawa would immediately kill her with the chemical injection. Luckily, Kirito, who was out of the hospital by then, came to Shinon's apartment on time so he could save her from Shinkawa's threat. However, when Kirito fought Shinkawa, Kirito was accidentally stabbed by Shinkawa's chemical injection, and Shinon, who saw the incident, looked panicked because she thought Kirito would die. However, Kirito survived because the injection only hit the heart rate detector installed on his chest, so the injection did not hit his body at all. After everything that happened to Shinon and Kirito, they not only solved the riddle of the death gun case but also managed to heal their past trauma slowly. This can be seen when Shinon is no longer afraid of the threat of a toy gun from her friends at school. The next day after school, Shinon went with Kirito to meet Kikuoka and give a report on all matters related to the death gun case. In the report, Kirito then informed that the two death guns, namely Shinkawa and his older brother, had been arrested and secured by the police. However, Kirito still received a report from the police investigation, which said that there was another death gun who had not been found. After reporting to Kikuoka, Kirito then took Shinon to a bar to meet someone who was also involved in the incident at the post office. Kirito had previously conducted a secret investigation regarding the incident. After gathering various information, it turned out that the woman who was working at the post office at that time was pregnant. Thanks to the courage of Shinon, who had killed the robber, the woman and her baby managed to survive death. Therefore, the woman and her daughter, who is now 6 years old, want to meet Shinon and thank her because she had saved them. After Shinon realized that what she had done in the past had helped keep others safe, she started crying and slowly came to terms with the wound she was in. The scene then switches to when Kirito and Levi enter the world of Alfheim Online, and in the game, they are suddenly attacked by a giant monster that makes them both fall into the underground world called Jotunheim. The world of Jotunheim itself is one of 9 worlds of Nordic mythology that are interconnected by a single tree of life called the Yggdrasil tree. So basically, the world of Jotunheim is another world that is connected to the world of Alfheim. When Kirito and Levi were in Jotunheim, they saw a white monster being attacked by an ogre, so Levi asked Kirito to help the white monster from the ogre attack. After the two of them defeated the ogre monster, Levi decided to name the white monster Tonki. As a thank you, Tonki helps Levi and Kirito return to the world of Alfheim by giving them a lift. On the way, Kirito saw an Excalibur sword stuck in an ice castle and intended to take the sword. But he then abandoned his intention after knowing that the guardian of the giant ice castle was very strong. When Kirito arrived in the world of Alfheim, Kirito and Levi invited their party members to come to a castle to help them get the Excalibur sword. The 5 party members were Asuna, Shinon, Lisbeth, Silica, Yui, and the only male member besides Kirito, Klein. After arriving in Jotunheim via a secret bridge, they also intend to depart immediately for the ice castle with the help of Tonki. But in the middle of the journey, they stopped because they saw several players who were attacking a monster similar to Tonki. Kirito and the others looked confused because Tonki, who was with them, looked like a friendly monster, but the other players attacked a monster similar to Tonki. In confusion, an NPC woman named the Queen of Ord suddenly appeared and told the reason behind the players' attacks on the monster. It all started when a Thrym king from the world of Niflheim intended to rule over the 8 other worlds, so that the king could get a golden apple that could create a Ragnarok disaster so that the Thrym king could destroy the entire world on the ALO game server. At first, King Thrym ruled the world of Jotunheim by summoning the sword Excalibur in the Erd Lake so that the roots of the tree of life Yggdrasil were cut off so that the world of Jotunheim was destroyed. When the world of Jotunheim was on the verge of collapse, the king of Thrym used the opportunity to attack the entire population of Jotunheim, including all the monsters in Jotunheim. But when 3 Jotunheim monsters named Erd, Skald, and Baruzandi managed to escape, the king of Thrym became furious and ordered everyone, including the players, to hunt down the 3 monsters. King Thrym promised the Excalibur sword to the players who managed to defeat the 3 monsters. Still, the Queen of Erd realized that the promise was just a lie because the King of Thrym only wanted his mission to conquer Jotunheim and eradicate the monster race to succeed. King Thrym deliberately tricked the players so that his goal of taking apples from the Asgard tree and creating the Ragnarok disaster could be achieved. After hearing that explanation, Lefa, Asuna, and Shinon looked surprised. How could the King of Thrym, who is an NPC, intend to destroy the game server when NPCs were created to animate a game from the start? Yui then said that it might be because the ALO game has the same system as the SAO game, where there is a system called Cardinal that allows NPCs to run on their own without the intervention of game developers. Hearing this, Kirito advised them to hurry to the ice castle and snatch the Excalibur sword from the Thrym King's hand. Thus the Thrym Kings do not have the power to rule over other worlds, so they can restore Jotunheim's world to its original state and prevent the other world from being destroyed. When they arrived at the ice castle, Kirito and the others had to unite their strength to fight against the very powerful castle guard monster. With that combined strength, they defeated the castle guard monster and entered the ice castle building. On the way to where the Excalibur sword was, Klein saw a very beautiful elf girl who was being locked up in an ice prison. Klein, fascinated by the girl's beauty, asked Kirito and the others to help free the girl from prison. At first, Shinon and the others refused to release the girl because they still didn't know if the girl was really a victim of the Thrym King or just a trap. But since Klein insisted on helping the elven girl, they had no choice but to free her from the ice prison. The elf girl then thanked Klein and introduced herself as Freya. After that, Kirito and the others immediately continued their journey towards the location where the Excalibur sword was. When they arrived at the location, they met the King of Thrym who was guarding the sword and immediately called Freya as his fiancée. It turns out that the reason the King of Thrym locked Freya in an ice prison was that Freya refused to become the King of Thrym's fiancée. After learning that the King of Thrym forced Freya to become his fiancée, Klein immediately attacked the King of Thrym with his ultimate attack named Uso no Skill. Kirito and the others also helped Klein defeat the Thrym King by attacking simultaneously. However, due to the power of the Thrym King being too great, all of Kirito's and the others' attacks did not damage the Thrym King at all. Seeing the deteriorating situation, Freya immediately told Kirito to find a golden hammer in the Thrym King's treasure pile because only that weapon could defeat the Thrym King's power. After successfully finding the golden hammer, Kirito immediately threw the hammer at Freya, and Freya miraculously turned into a powerful giant named Thor. It turned out that Freya's true form was not an elf girl but a male giant, and not only Klein who was deceived by Freya's appearance but also the King of Thrym who had intended to marry her from the start. With the power of Thor's golden hammer and the combined attacks of Kirito's party members, they finally managed to defeat the King of Thrym, and Kirito was able to pull the Sword of Excalibur from the land of Jotunheim. As a result, the world of Jotunheim returns to normal because the life energy from the Yggdrasil tree can again flow into the world of Jotunheim. A few days later, many LO game players started to talk a lot about the appearance of the strongest female player in the LO game named Zekken. The name Zekken itself comes from the abbreviation Zekai Mudeki no Ken, which means an invincible sword, because Zekken's fighting ability is known to be extraordinary. Even Kirito, who is known as one of the top players of the LO game and the strongest sword user, was also defeated by Zekken. After hearing the news of Kirito's defeat, Asuna became curious about Zekken's strength and intended to fight Zekken. Before Asuna went to see Zekken, Kirito warned Asuna to be careful because Zekken had completely merged with the virtual world, as if Zekken had lived in the Alfheim world for a long time. Seeing Asuna, who was still confused, Kirito explained that the technology used by Zekken to do a full dive or login in the LO game was very advanced. However, Asuna, who is still curious about Zekken's strength, prefers to test her strength directly so that when Asuna meets Zekken, she immediately challenges her to a one-on-one duel. Zekken happily accepted the challenge, and the battle between Asuna and Zekken began. After a very fierce fight, Zekken once again managed to win the duel like any other fight she had before. However, Zekken was very interested in Asuna, who looked very determined to win the duel, so Zekken offered Asuna to join her Sleeping Knight Guild. Asuna accepted the offer as she had a lot of free time in the last few weeks. After Zekken invited Asuna to go to the Sleeping Knights Guild headquarters, she started telling Asuna her real name, Yuki. Asuna then asked Yuki why she didn't invite Kirito to join the Sleeping Knight Guild when he was a better player than Asuna. Smiling, Yuki said that she couldn't do that because Kirito already knew her secret. After that, Yuki explained the purpose of forming the Sleeping Knight Guild, which was to defeat every floor monster boss and engrave the name of each member on a hero's inscription. Yuki added that this guild was only a temporary guild that would be disbanded in spring, even though the Sleeping Knights Guild had not defeated all the floor bosses because all the Sleeping Knights members would be busy in the real world. That night, Asuna and the rest of the Sleeping Knights Guild intended to defeat the floor boss in a cave. However, when they got there, many other players blocked the Sleeping Knight Guild members from entering the floor boss location. At first, Yuki intended to fight against the players so that the other Sleeping Knight members could go to the location where the floor boss was. However, due to the large number of players blocking them, Yuki chose to give up and cancelled the mission to defeat the floor boss. Fortunately, Kirito and Klein came to the place and helped them defeat the players so that Yuki and the rest of the Sleeping Knights could go to the floor boss's location first. Kirito then intends to try the Excalibur sword he got the other day, and Klein also wants to try fighting using the iron hammer previously given by Freya. Meanwhile, Asuna, Yuki, and the rest of the Sleeping Knights began to fight against the floor boss in the form of a two-headed monster. After quite a fierce battle, all the members of the Sleeping Knights finally managed to defeat the floor boss and immortalize their names in the 27th floor's hero inscription. After completing the mission, Yuki thanked Asuna and accidentally called her big sister. The surprised Asuna immediately asked Yuki why she suddenly called her by that name. But Yuki instead apologized while crying and immediately logged out of the game without explaining anything to Asuna. That night, Asuna looked very upset because Yuki suddenly left her without giving any explanation and started to wonder if she had made a mistake. In that confusion, Asuna was approached by a female member of the Sleeping Knights Guild named Shizune. While holding back tears, Shizune then apologized to Asuna for what happened to her before she finally said goodbye to Asuna on behalf of the other Sleeping Knights Guild members. Before Asuna could ask why Shizune apologized, she had already logged out of the game. The next day while at school, Kirito saw the sad look on Asuna's face and immediately asked what was bothering her mind. Asuna told him about the events she experienced with Yuki and Shizune the other day. Hearing this, Kirito gave her the hospital address where Yuki logged into the ALO game. Kirito found out when he was investigating a medical device called Metacuboid developed by the government. Metacuboid is a sophisticated medical device that relieves pain and provides life support for patients with very severe diseases. Metacuboid technology is also a tool that is directly connected to the virtual world so that patients who use the tool can explore various virtual worlds such as online games and so on. After hearing that, Asuna immediately rushed to the hospital and met a male doctor who had been treating Yuki. After introducing himself, the male doctor immediately recognized her because Yuki had previously ordered him to inform her about her condition if Asuna came to visit her. While walking toward the room where Yuki was being treated, the male doctor told Asuna that Yuki was currently suffering from a very severe immune disease. Yuki has been undergoing treatment at the hospital since childhood, and over the past 3 years, she has started using the Metacuboid device to support her life. After all, Metacuboid only serves to reduce pain and delay the spread of disease in Yuki's body so that her condition will continue to worsen day by day. Even so, Yuki still had some sense when using the tool and spent most of her time exploring the virtual world. When Yuki saw Asuna in the ALO game for the first time, she immediately felt a very close relationship with her because she had a face that was very similar to her older sister named Ako. Before Ako died a few years ago, she was also one of the ALO game players and the founder of the Sleeping Knight Guild. Before Asuna joined, all the members of the Sleeping Knights Guild were patients with deadly diseases like Yuki and Ako. After Ako left, Yuki made a policy for the Sleeping Knight Guild where if one of the guild members died, the guild would be disbanded. It turns out that she intends to disband the guild in the spring because spring will be the last trip for her. Using the Metacuboid device, Yuki tried to communicate with Asuna and explain why she suddenly left her. Yuki did that on purpose because she didn't want to make too many memories with Asuna. After all those memories could hurt Asuna when Yuki left. But Asuna immediately denied that and said she didn't mind creating more memories with Yuki. Asuna then asked what Yuki's wish had not yet been achieved so that she could help her achieve all of those dreams. Yuki then says that she really wants to go to school and see her old house, which her family has abandoned for a long time. Hearing that, Asuna promised she would try to help grant Yuki's wish. Moreover, currently, Kirito and his friends are developing a tool called mechatronics that can be used to connect a camera with a Metacuboid device. After the mechatronic equipment was finished, Asuna started to bring it with her while at school so that Yuki could also experience the learning experience at school. Not only that, but Asuna also brought the device to Yuki's old home address so that she could see the house full of her childhood memories, as Asuna had promised earlier. But even though Yuki claimed to be satisfied with all of that, Asuna wanted to give more memories in the last days of Yuki's life. She then took Yuki to school every day and went to visit various tourist attractions and beat more floor bosses in the ALO game. Until spring arrived, Yuki spent her last day in the ALO game with Asuna and gave her a rare sword weapon from her collection. In the last seconds, before Yuki died, all the Sleeping Knights Guild members and ALO players gathered to pay their last respects to Yuki. On the day of Yuki's funeral, Asuna met with Shizune and told her that several other members of the Sleeping Knights had recovered from their illnesses due to Yuki's sacrifice, who was willing to test the Metacuboid device for the first time. Recently, Kirito began to learn that the Metacuboid device was not actually a tool developed by the government but a tool created by Rinko Kojiro. After knowing that, Kirito looked surprised because Rinko was the girlfriend of Kayaba Akihiko, the SAO game creator. This is the end of the second season of this anime.